Yeah, that's so. Yeah, I did this program quite a lot. I was working here, and then they were taking it shorthand. But doing that, it's kind of fun. Yeah, exactly. Actually, I got actually the part for the sketch, which is always interesting. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Pretty sure. But this is kind of a good one. So this is probably this thing is cute. She thought that was a thumbs up. That's the only this is a phone. And so I said, yeah. And so I said, well, get up and drive home. And she says, okay. And then, so then I called. She says, well, why don't you call? I said, well, because it's right. I guess I need to check out my emotions. Well, welcome once again to ARTbreak, everyone. So nice to see a good turnout today. Well, I think for most of us, our first and perhaps last encounter with papier-mâché might have been in something like an elementary school art project. And it's used so often there for, I think, the reasons that it's inexpensive, it's easy to put together and use, and often what kids come away from the experience, from I remember, is the wonderful sort of slimy feeling you get when you're working with it. So it's not a medium we expect a serious artist to really investigate, but that's exactly what our guest today, Gayle Reyes, has done. For the past 20 years, she's been working with papier-mâché, and which really went back to it out of circumstances she'll talk about. And I think it's really wonderful when you see an artist who takes a sort of an ignored medium or something that's basically thought of as for kids and not taken seriously, and then really creates something out of it and extends the possibilities and shows that it can be an expressive medium in itself. So, yes? You're having trouble hearing. Okay. The volume is pretty much all the way up. Is this better? I'll try to get closer. Okay. Anything essential you missed, I think, will be taken answered soon. But anyway, I do want to say that, seeing what an artist can do with this ignored medium or is viewed as something for kids to play with, I think is really kind of inspiring because it shows how artists can explore the limitations of something and really extend it in new directions. So in addition to being an artist, Gayle has also been very involved with as an art educator. Over the past 20 years, she's taught in the Kalamazoo public schools and done a number of community programs. And in 2013, she joined the Education for the Arts as a teacher, as an artist instructor is there. And currently she's working at EFA as facilitating the high school enrichment program, which takes place here at the KIA. I should add too that you're teaching a class in the fall in papier-mâché, so I think that's important to notice. An example of her work you can actually see in the KIA library if you kind of peek through the window, it's closed. But anyway, without further ado, please welcome Gayle Reyes.
Don't take minutes. Hi. Thanks, Greg. Actually, I took a class with Greg. We were just talking out here in the lobby. I took a class with life drawing class with Greg, probably 1983, I think, from here. So it was good to see him again. It's been a while. But anyway, welcome and thank you for coming. Greg covered a lot of the information as far as introducing myself, but I am teaching here in several different capacities with Education for the Arts. The high school students come during the school year every morning, and actually what brought me back to papier-mâché was during COVID, when the students were at home and we were teaching online and they needed to get materials, and so they could work with materials that they found, around the house. And through my little video instruction, they were able to create their own pieces in papier-mâché, and they did a great job considering that I wasn't right there with them. So that was pretty awesome to see that. Can everybody hear me okay? Yes. Okay. I have my teacher voice on. So, so anyway, I wanted to just kind of talk to you a little bit about papier-mâché. I was asked to talk about it, and I've done a little bit of research, even learned some things this past week that I didn't know that I'm happy to share with you about papier-mâché. But like Greg said, it's this humble material, it's upcycling, which we need to do, right? That's what we need to do. And as an artist, can't always afford materials, can't always come up with, because it's so expensive nowadays, especially. So one of the things that in my research, and I started thinking about it, is, there's this when was papier-mâché first started? And I'll tell you in a second as far as what humans have done, but papier-mâché was actually developed by the wasp, the queen wasp. She chews up wood and mixes it with her saliva, and then she creates paper for her nest. Now, a few years back, I came across a vacated wasp nest, and actually used that paper from the wasp nest to create a vessel that I was dipping in glue and building up, and it was really quite beautiful. It had just that natural look, and there's just something really beautiful and sensual about taking things from nature and recreating them into something else. So the beginning, back in the Han Dynasty in China, paper was first created then. And so they found they found actual helmets, ceremonial helmets that were made from paper pulp and lacquer. And the lacquer actually comes from a tree that would be similar to poison oak. And so when they tap the tree for the lacquer, they can only get about a half a cup of lacquer at a time, and then they can't retap that tree for 2 years. It actually was a law that they couldn't do that. There was a lot of artifacts that were found or that were made, vessels, small containers, and things that were made with this lacquer finish. In fact, the people that collected the lacquer had to build up a tolerance to it because of the bad rashes that they would get from the lacquer. So when these first were made, they would basically, if you think about, paper and how hard it is to make paper, and so it was precious, and so they would repurpose it, kind of like what we're doing now as artists, repurposing materials. Later on down, so from China, then the papier-mâché products were being taken to Persia and to India, and then they were starting to make their, masks and different things in papier-mâché as an art form, and it was decorative. And then during Victorian era, they had seen the different artifacts that came from China that were made with with the varnishes, and they were black, and beautiful boxes and fans and screens that were decorated with gold leaf. And so during the Victorian era, they started creating these chairs and furniture. So this is a process called japanning. And it was made in the late 1700s by Henry Clay. He was the first one that discovered this. He would take sheets of paper, he coated them on both sides with adhesive, and then press it together, dip it into linseed oil to make it waterproof. And then they made these big, huge panels that they actually built houses and then they could press it in to make the furniture, the chairs and things. These things, some of these things are still around today. And so we're talking about from the 1700s. So I had somebody ask me earlier today, is it durable? Well, yeah, it can be. And so yeah, I thought that was a really neat thing to see and I have seen in museums, I've seen some of these pieces, and they're gorgeous. They're absolutely beautiful. So here are some strange ingredients that go into papier-mâché, or have gone into papier-mâché. Tobacco leaves were found in Germany. They made the doll heads, and they made them out of papier-mâché, and they actually put tobacco leaves in it. I'm not sure why. I didn't see anything about it. I don't know if it's maybe an insect repellent. I'm not sure. But they used the tobacco leaves. So again, it's finding what you have around, right, and making things from that. Garlic. Anybody have an idea why garlic would be used in papier-mâché? It's it's a repellent, an insect repellent. And then cinnamon and cloves to cover up the smell of the garlic was added. Mashed potatoes. I thought, well, that's interesting. But as I started thinking about why would they use mashed potatoes, the starch, right? So it would be a binder and it would hold things together. This one is strange. Broccoli, cabbage, and cauliflower. And that was developed by, let me get the names of it, Johnson and Maloney. And they had a patent, actually, on this recipe. I don't know anybody would actually want their recipe, but they did have a patent on it. It'd make a good dinner, but I don't know about papier-mâché. And then toilet paper, which is still used today. In fact, I was talking to a couple friends of mine who have done theatrical makeup and do like cosplay and stuff. And they make like zombie wounds and things like that. I didn't get a picture for you. I know you don't want to see it. But they had the glue, it's Elmer's glue, and they actually apply it on their body and put the tissue down, and you can wrinkle it and move it around and then use theatrical makeup to color it. So that is something that's used now. But it is something that artists do use, because you can get a really nice, fine paper clay when you mix up toilet paper and glue together. So here's a couple examples of work that I did. And I started in papier-mâché. My daughter is now, she's turning 24, and so about 23 years ago, I was taking classes here at the KIA and working mostly in sculpture clay, and I was taking a class from Martha Rosenfeld, who still teaches here now. And she messed around with a recipe, adding paper into the stoneware so that we could actually build our sculptures up taller. And so that kind of gave me this idea, like, I can't keep taking this class because I got to be home with my daughter. I can't come in, and I want to create all the time. That's just how I am. So I had stayed home for a while, for a couple of years, and started researching papier-mâché. And back then, this would have been 1999-ish, probably. There wasn't a whole lot of information like we have now on the internet. So I went to all the local libraries, took out all of the 1960s, 1970s crafty papier-mâché books. But there were some contemporary papier-mâché books out at the time, and I was amazed at what the possibilities were with papier-mâché. And what I found was that it was almost like a cookbook, every one of these books. There was step by step, there was recipes, all sorts of recipes. And so I spent probably a good 2 years exploring recipes and just trying different things and just making small items, vases and such. The two vases in the background, the one that has more of the terracotta color. I was going for something that looked more like clay. The one that has the patina, I was going for something that looked like metal. My background was in metals and jewelry, and I spent a lot of time doing clay. So those were just, for me, really comfortable materials that I have a lot of ideas about. The fish in the front, I started making a series of koi fish and goldfish. I actually had an aquarium business at the time, so I was inspired by the fish. And so I made a lot of fish themes. And the face, so just to break it down a little bit for you, the body is made out of aluminum foil. And then the face was the toilet paper and glue that I was able to sculpt it into, and you can get quite a bit of detail that way. The fins, and I don't know if anybody remembers back then, but there was, and maybe they still make it, there was like this paper rope that was for decorating a lot, and you could undo it and make flowers and bows and such with. I found this paper, and it's inexpensive, so I got that, and I loved the wrinkles and everything, the creases in it, and it really made for nice fins and tails, and so that was what I used to create that. And then tissue is what I used to coat the outside of it, and moving it with the glue, moving it around. The glue I use is Elmer's glue wall. It is strong. These things are 22 years old. They have been traveling around with me when I go and do talks, and every time I teach a class. They were sitting out in a pole barn and not getting rained on, but they, temperature change from, whatever, 100 degrees down to minus 20 when we had really bad winters. So, and they're still standing the test of time. They still stand up well. So I feel like now when I went back into doing papier-mâché, which, like I said, was when I was working with my high school students, and that kind of forced me to revisit it again and take it seriously. And so I've started making some other works. Here is a piece that was in the faculty show here this last December. And it's a process I'm working on, making the parts and pieces. And it was a heron. And as you see, I'm working with, there's like these papers that are in front of me. I found later on Italian crepe paper, which I don't know if anybody has used that before. They use it for flower making, to make flowers. And it's stretchy and amazing and wonderful. And so I started exploring with the Italian crepe papers, and there's different kinds. There's some that have a real fine texture to really thick, coarse textures, and could get different kinds of effects and textures on my sculptures. I made these little fish. I have one in my hand. I don't know how many. I made like 12 of them or something that I attached into it. And so anyway, this is just kind of the beginning process. This was, well, I shouldn't say the beginning. It's the middle before I started putting on the paint. But I just wanted to show you the different materials that you can use and how you can add to it. So this is a kind of a diagram of how I start a sculpture. And so I think of it as the bones, the muscles, the skin, whenever I'm doing papier-mâché. So the bones would be the armature. The bones in this case, and this is the background or the idea behind the piece that is in the library right now, and that's called Fine Feathers. So I started with a steel armature, so that's steel rod that's welded together, and it's on a stand that's metal. And then I added, using aluminum wire, like armature wire, I created the cage, like the rib cage around it. Then I filled that with compacted newspaper. And in fact, the technique of how I use the newspaper I had learned from Steve Hansen. Not that I know Stephen Hansen. I watched a video and it demonstrated in the video how he rolled that paper, and it works really well. That's what I love about working with other artists, is you start picking up all these different little ideas about how to make your work better. And they're the ones that went through the pain of figuring it out. I'm going to take advantage of that. So I did. So that was filled with all this compacted paper. the one where it says aluminum foil, that's what I use to build around the neck and the head and the thighs. And then where there's the wing wire armature, it's actually like a screen that's wrapped around the wings, and that way I can attach the feathers to that. Here is actually the beginning of the heron that I showed you earlier, and this is what I would consider the muscles. So this piece is completely made. It didn't have an armature like my other piece. It's quite a bit smaller. It's probably half the size of the sandhill crane. I used, as you can tell, like saltine boxes, and I have a Chinese food takeout container, like for chicken noodle soup, I know it is, and cream cheese container, and toilet paper rolls, and some couple sticks, and then the inside packing for, I think, a microwave or something. And so adding, building up the basically the form using all these materials that I just got from home. This was during COVID that I made this one.
How do you glue them together?
So mostly with tape. The question was, how do you glue them together? I use, like on that one, I was using some duct tape and some masking tape to put it together, and hot glue gun, basic, really easy materials to just get it together. What holds it together is the glue, which I'll talk to you about in just a second. But yeah, so here's a couple examples of sculptures that are being made in the monumental sculpture class that I'm co-teaching right now with Brent Harris. And Brent is brings his sculpture knowledge to it, and as far as like the armature and building of the form and everything, he brings that. But we are incorporating papier-mâché techniques into this. These pieces will be able to be outside. Not recommending for the winter, but we can put them out as long as they're not in standing water, because we'll be using a 2-part epoxy to seal them up that will then coat them, and they'll be able to withstand it. There was an article that I just read that just confirmed that theory that we had. And so somebody that actually, and it's all about experimenting, right? When it comes to making art, you're trying out new things. And this artist, he was in the UK, and papier-mâché is a big thing in the United Kingdom right now. I don't know what it is, but there's articles from them all over. So it must just be part of, I don't know, it's what the artists are doing right now. But he had tried out all these different things, doing different sealants on top, and the one that worked was the 2-part epoxy. So that was good to hear, and see the picture, the before and after, they look the same. I'm like, yay, we were right on track. So the skinning stage, which is what holds it together. So when you're putting it together, and you had asked about, how do you put this together? We use the tape and things to put it together. Wire, sometimes I'm using wire to put around it, depending on the size of the piece. But one technique is using, I use Elmer's glue and water, and it's the glue-all, not the washable. The glue-all is super strong. And but I have tried wallpaper paste. I've never done the flour and water mixture. I go straight to the strong stuff. So anyway, you're dipping strips of paper into the water, just like you probably remember from your 4th grade art projects that you might have done way back when, and and then cover the whole piece. I actually, sometimes I see, when I look at the books or see what people are doing, they're putting so many layers on it. And I have found that I don't have to put that many layers on, usually 4 or 5 at the most. And with that glue, using, the glue-all, it really does hold it together. And it takes some time to cure. It takes a few days or so to, even a couple weeks. You can almost tell the difference. All of a sudden it's cured, and it's really strong. You can like tap on it and it doesn't give at all. So it's the way that I go if I'm using this technique for doing papier-mâché. So another technique is the paper pulp, or the chewed paper. And so the term papier-mâché is French, meaning chewed paper, even though, and like they started calling that, and it just kind of stuck, and everybody's using that term. But carton-pierre is the stone cardboard. This technique was used to create like the rosettes in interior architecture. It was super lightweight. They can press it into molds. It was probably, my guess would be that it was mixed with a little bit of plaster, which is what we used in my class. That's what we use. So we're using paper that is blown in for insulation. So it's already all chewed up. It has borax in it, which is a type of insecticide, but it's basically salt that is to keep it from, or not insecticide, I'm sorry, a fungicide, and it keeps it from molding. And then we add in plaster, and I have tried plaster of Paris, doesn't work. You go through and you try all these different things. Don't use plaster of Paris. So we're using hydrocal, which is used in construction, or we use the molding plaster, which is used to make molds for clay. You can get them from clay suppliers. And come up with kind of this one-to-one-to-one sort of recipe. Brent turned me on to a way to mix it. The order does matter. We figured out how to make that order work. And we are able to make a really nice paper clay. In the monumental sculpture class, students they're just kind of cooking like you do on the stove, where you're a little bit of this and a little bit of that. They've figured it out, and they can make up these batches really quick. So you make small batches and keep adding on. And this is one of the students, Sue, who's adding the paper pulp to the outside of her form. Her form was in foam to begin with. It was like construction foam that she had formed into this shape. So there's obviously still works in progress, but you can tell how large these pieces are. And she can pick them up and carry them. They're lightweight because it's paper, it's not wood, it's not clay. And so that's one of the major benefits of using paper clay is that it is lightweight, it is easy to work with. You can do it at home. You don't have to have, although it's messy, so they would rather do it here in the studio than at their home, but you can do it at home. So here's another example of using the paper pulp. This is Jane, who's making a crane as well. This will be an outdoor piece that she's making. And she'll be adding wings to it. And so she's applying the layers of the paper pulp, building up the structure. It is hard. Like it does, if you knock on it, it's like stone. It really is. So I want to talk a little bit about the different materials that we use. Paul is making an eagle, and he right here is kind of mass producing a bunch of feathers. As I talked about that Italian crepe paper, this is an example of the crepe paper. It has the ridges through it, so it gives the illusion of feathers. It adds more texture to the sculpture, which I think is something that I really like. Just seeing that texture. And here again in class, this one, and this is something that I wanted to talk about too with papier-mâché. We think of papier-mâché as paper. What she's using is cheesecloth dipped in glue and plaster and wrapping it around the armature. And to me, that is still a papier-mâché technique, even if it's not paper. It's still the same idea. And so I think of papier-mâché more as a process rather than really being stuck on what the material is. You can add straw to it. There's a lot of different kinds of materials that can be added in to give it strength. Anything that you're adding glue to and doing this layering method, to me, is similar to using papier-mâché. So I don't limit myself like it has to be just paper. I'm like, let's try this, let's try that. What's going to work? Here's another example. One of my students' work from the high school EFA program, and she had Brent had come in as a visiting artist and worked with my class, and so we did cast molds off of their face that was done with gauze and plaster, like what you would for a cast. And then she sculpted the piece on the front out of the same material and painted it. And so again, it was, whether it be paper, if she was using newspaper, or whether she's using the gauze and plaster, it does have the same effect, and it is the same process. So here's an example of the heron finished. This was in the faculty show this past December. I started, when I did this, I created this form to get my kids started in EFA to, when they were home for COVID. That's what you guys saw the earlier slide. So then when I finished it, I actually was going to leave it white. And my friends, who are very honest with me, my art friends, critiqued me and said, you need to add some color. You need to do some color. So I'm glad that I listened. So what I used on this piece was oil paint. I started with a gesso base, which is like a primer, and then I painted several layers of oil paint. I have been painting now for some time, doing pet portraits and animal portraits, so it was basically using the same color palette. But it is different painting something that's a three-dimensional form compared to painting something that's flat. And one of the things that can happen with a three-dimensional form is that you can flatten it out. And that's the last thing I want to do after I've done all this work. So just really building up, the dark tones, mid-tones, and the highlights the same way as I would a painting, but really working with the form to do that. This piece is based on an Aesop fable. Whenever I'm doing a sculpture or painting of an animal, I like to look up stories from different cultures and fables and things, just to kind of give the animal some spirit, give it a story, give it some energy. And so this is based on a story of the heron that went out to get breakfast, and he was being picky, and he ended up just having a tiny little morsel of a snail at the end of the day. I kind of made it into more of a contemporary as I was working on this and thinking about what's going on in the world today, and started thinking about greed being the theme of this piece, and that the heron goes out and eats everything in sight, and basically isn't going to leave anything behind. Although it's hard to see in the slide, there is a hook that is in the fish's mouth, and so the heron does not see that he's going to swallow a hook as well. Basically the moral of the story is that greed hurts us all. The next piece, and this is the piece that's over in the library right now on display. You can see it through the window. The library's not open right now, but will be, I think, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, something like that. But you can see it through the window. And so this piece, Fine Feathers, I did for the Kalamazoo Nature Center show. When the Kalamazoo Nature Center had recently renovated their area that used to have a lot of permanent exhibitions. Now it is something that's always rotating and changing. It's a great space. It was really a wonderful show. And Brent Harris had curated it and invited a lot of different artists that work with natural themes and nature themes. And so this piece is also based on an Aesop fable. It's the peacock and the crane, and the peacock is walking around, strutting around, talking about how beautiful he is, and telling the crane how plain he is. And the crane, in turn, dances and flies up in the sky and says, "Fine feathers do not make fine friends." And so, and I thought about, there's a lot of things, today in this world where we can think about bullying and, and different things that happen, because I'm always thinking about my kids, just the different things that happen. So anyway, that was the theme for that piece. This piece I did a little different. I had less time to finish it, and it's quite a big piece. So I actually had some spray paints that for projects that leftover spray paints that I used to paint underneath. And then I also mixed it with, I applied layers of acrylic paint on top and used what's called gilding wax that I use oftentimes in my ceramics to give it kind of some metallic shine here and there. That was a really fun piece to do.
How long would that take you to do? You said you hurried it up.
Well, I shouldn't say I hurried up in the fact that so the question was, how long did it take me to do? It should have taken me several months. I had to do it in 2 weeks, but I was working like 12 hours a day to do it. So it was like getting up early in the morning with my coffee and start in and just work. So, and I will admit it was a little bit tacky when I took it to the show. like everything I make, it's just a little, not quite dry because I can't stop until the end, until I can't do anything more. So, familiar piece for some of you, you recognize this is Stephen Hansen's work. And I just wanted to share a little bit my connection with Stephen Hansen, actually. When I first started doing papier-mâché, somebody had loaned me a video that was from here for me to take a look at, and it was a Stephen Hansen VCR video, promotional thing. And he actually was in a studio, and it showed him how he puts his sculptures together. So it was really fascinating to see that. And he uses, where I use the wire, he uses wood, and he uses 2x4s for his form and put them together that way. And then I told you about that paper, how he can tighten it up into these balls. This technique that he uses, he applies that for the muscle. And then the skin is craft paper, large sheets of craft paper. And it looked like it was wallpaper paste that he used because it was very jelly looking, in a big bat that he would dunk it into and put over the top. And so once I had been working in papier-mâché for a few years, and word of mouth, someone found out that I did and asked me to repair their Stephen Hansen that had had some water damage because it had sat on the floor of something that I think they had a flood or something in their house. You find out so many things about an artist's work when you repair their work, when you get in there and you can kind of dissect it and see so it was really interesting for me to do it. And I was really happy to have that opportunity to repair it and make it look exactly like it belonged, and that was quite a lot of fun. And in closing, I have a quote from Stephen Hansen that I wanted to read to you. And so this was something that he was a write-up because he was from Water Street Gallery. As an artist, I am not an explorer of the human condition so much as a hapless tourist making snapshots of whatever strikes my fancy. I work primarily in papier-mâché, the appeal of which is twofold. First, it's fast enough that I can try out ideas without any sense of commitment. Secondly, it is a material so inherently humble that I can claim to make cultural icons or distilled social observations without feeling too pretentious. Stylistically, I think of my work as lifelike rather than realistic, a choice made out of a desire to represent ideas rather than the individual. I make sculptures with the idea that it should both attract and communicate. Towards that end, I try to create art that is intellectually accessible and aesthetically seductive. I approach my workday as though I were a directory of a small repertory company with a group of actors that I costume and coerce into the character in the story I want to tell. They tend towards overacting. So if you'd like to see some of Stephen Hansen's work, it's down in the Children's Gallery downstairs, and it is open right now. And you can see up close, the process that he uses. And it's just really fun to see. And some of those pieces are from like the 80s, and they've been around in people's homes, and they're on loan right now or have been donated. And they still are standing up and look great. So I think it's something that sometimes people, we think about them as piñatas, or we think about them as something that is a throwaway. But really, with the right glue, with the right binder, with the right materials, with the right technique, they can last for a long time. So I think it's just a great method that I'd love to see more people being able to do. I will be teaching this next fall a papier-mâché inspired by nature papier-mâché class. And Brent and I, we had this monumental sculpture class that we've done, and let me tell you, they're blowing my mind. The stuff is amazing that's coming out of there, and huge. I mean, like huge work, and so it's exciting. And that was kind of a pilot, and we were just asked this last Thursday, are we going to do this again? And I think we are. So anyway, I want to thank you for coming. Is there any questions at all? Yes.
What was the broccoli, cabbage, and cauliflower used for? What was its purpose?
So the question was, what was the broccoli, cabbage, and cauliflower used for? What was the purpose? And I don't know. I don't.
You didn't mention it.
Yeah, because, well, and they didn't tell in the information. It just was there's such strange ingredients that I had to put it up there, but I really can't figure it out. I tried. It makes no sense to me. A stew is what it sounds like. Anything else? Yes.
I have two questions.
Okay.
One, are you able to sand papier-mâché at all? Like, are you able to bring texture down again once you've worked with it?
Yeah, so the question is, are you able to sand papier-mâché? Are you able to bring down texture? So with the paper pulp especially, because it's mixed, the paper pulp's mixed with both plaster and glue, that yes, you can. And they are using rasps to form it. The one that I showed you with the two big sculptures, that's what she's doing. In fact, she used, yesterday I stopped by, and I just love it when my students are using the studio time. And I had 3 papier-mâché artists in there working. It was just exciting to see. And one of them, she was grinding away with like a grinder actually on it, and she was getting these really nice smooth areas, and then there was the dip still, and that was what she's going for, because she wants to have the appearance of a bronze sculpture. So it'll be really beautiful. What was your second question?
Have you found that papier-mâché can stick to anything, or are there things that you have found that just repel it?
Okay, so the question was, have you found that that papier-mâché can stick to anything, or are there materials that can repel it? Plastic repels. So it has to be something that it can get into, and so like cloth works really well. Screen, like there's armature wire that's like a screen that you can form, and it'll get into those little holes and hold in place. If you put too much masking tape on something, the papier-mâché just slides right off, or if you put too much duct tape, So and it is just a lot of experimenting and seeing what works and what doesn't work. But I tried to use some parachute material to see if I could do something with that. No go. It didn't work. And there was another hand up I saw. No. Any more questions? Okay. Well, that's all I have, but I just want to thank you all for coming. You've been great. Thanks.